Welcome everyone to another edition of the Subseasonal Forecast Contest. My name is David Margolin, and today's August 11th. We're forecasting out to the end of August, August 26th to August 30th. That's hard to believe, huh? So next week we'll be forecasting into September. All right, in terms of today's agenda, I think we're going to propose we start with attribution. So we'll look at last week's forecast and the summer in general. And then we'll shift gears into today's forecast, still forecasting CDDs. And then we may have some time also to talk about some research topics. I know a couple of the folks online have been working on a couple interesting research projects, so maybe we'll have time for that too. Outside of that, are there any hot topics of the day that folks would like us to discuss before we get going?
Did you see the derecho yesterday?
I did not.
Check the Iowa, Illinois area. There was over 100-mile-an-hour wind gusts over a fairly widespread area.
When
they got
that?
slams yesterday.
Oh, geez. Okay.
If you check SPC, you'll see all the black squares.
All right, let's check
In fact, there's so many black squares that in some places they're sort of invisible because of the white boundary around the black squares.
Let's check it out real quick. That's a good. Yesterday. Oh my God. Yep. Oh Lord. Holy gosh. Yeah, that's not good. No one here from Chicago area, is there? Yeah, you're New Jersey, Lynn's New Jersey, Zach's New York, Dr. Decker's New Jersey, Phillips, New York. So,
I don't think that beats my 60-mile-an-hour winds from Isaiah's.
Yeah, that's pretty good. That's true. We had a lot. We didn't have power for about 2.5 days, 60 hours.
Okay.
Just enough time to ruin everything in the freezer. All right, cool. Well, yeah, if you think of anything else, let us know. We'll probably have some time today. So, and before we get going, just wanted to bring to attention a couple of the new researchy things we have online for folks to use. A couple minor housekeeping notes too. You may have seen this. We just changed the naming convention of a couple things here. We just call this performance instead of archive. Just thought it was a little bit more appropriate. And we added a research category just, again, because we had a few different, the tools category or the tools bucket was getting pretty long, and we thought we could put some of that stuff into a research bucket. And I did want to show you this MJO phase diagram item. This is the result of research that really started with Dr. Decker, actually, is on the line. And then we had a lot of help from a different variety of folks. But so I think most of you are familiar with the phase diagram, and we just built a little bit of a UI around it to make it a little bit easier to navigate through the charts and such. So, it's pretty easy to navigate, kind of neat. And we could certainly add more rows to this. Right now, you've got the heating season up top and the cooling season CDDs on the bottom. So I guess the CDDs is most relevant here in late summer. And this particular chart is, so it's looking at a lag of 1 to 5 days. So basically it'd be like if you were using this for, what are we in, like around August 10th, this would give you sort of a historical perspective of what to expect the next 5 days. The progression filter means that it doesn't require any kind of progression of the MJO. It just looks at all dates that meet these sort of other requirements in terms of phase and amplitude. Any questions about this little UI before we move forward?
Maybe I just have a question about the research that went into it. So was there any investigation about which lag gives you the strongest signal? Is it days 1 to 5 for sure, or if you look at days 6 to 10?
Yeah, we did. I have briefly looked at that, and I say briefly because I haven't done any kind of comprehensive analysis. From quick memory, I want to say that the 1 to 5 is probably the strongest, but I'm not certain. I know I did look at the 6 to 10, 11 to 15, and even the 16 to 20, and there were certainly relationships. But if you put a gun to my head and said which had the strongest appearance of, of relationship and amplitude, I'd say it might have been the short term, but I'm not 100%. So, but I think that would be a great idea. Sort of maybe where you're alluding to also is, as we do maybe think about adding to this, we could have a lag of 1 to 5, 6 to 10, 11 to 15, and it would be really easy, right? Because then we could actually just go vertically. We could kind of stack it, and that way you could see, all right, in early August, how do those different lag relationships vary? I think that'd be a great addition.
That was exactly going to be my comment, to add a lag option somewhere. So,
yeah, I like that a lot. Just like you could go horizontal, you can go vertical with the CDDs and HDDs. That's a really good idea. Yeah, thank you. And I mean, I guess because a few folks are probably new to this. In this example, I guess let's look at a relevant example. August 10th. So we're around August 10th. So again, this is like a short-term relationship. So this is suggesting, just visually, obviously not statistically, but visually, that there's some pretty good, there's a relationship with, above normal CDD anomalies, warmer than normal temperatures, if you will, when you get into strong phase 8, 1, 2, in particular phase kind of 1 and 2 here, out here where the anomalies, the dots are biggest and reddest or pinkest. And then on the opposite end of things, it looks like there's a little bit of a cohesive cool signal there out in phase 5, and then maybe out to phase 7. And then, according to this, there's a little bit of a break, in phase 6, whether that's just a statistical artifact or not, I'm not sure without further investigation. Same thing I would say with these phase 3 and 4, because we don't show explicitly the sample size here, which would be another nice thing to show. But my guess is that the sample size out here at the edge of phase 3 and 4 gets smaller and smaller. So, be careful about assuming that this is a physical relationship out here.
So does a blank circle, a blank space indicate, I guess it could indicate two things. There's 0 sample size, or the actual signal is between -1 and 1 from whatever samples do exist. Like for instance, in that cold area in phase 3, 4, if you increase the amplitude a little bit, I see some blank spaces there, right there, yep. Is that indicating that in those areas there were no samples at all in the data set, or that it was, there were some samples, but they averaged out to close to 0?
Yeah, I think it's the first thing you said. So within the boundaries of plus and minus 2 on the RMM scale, you could see we went to, and by the way, that was somewhat arbitrary, but not completely arbitrary, because basically the sample size starts to really get down into the lower numbers. But that's why I chose kind of -2, +2. So anything beyond +2, -2 is just, the analysis did not extend beyond there. But yes, Dr. Decker, you're right. I guess, right, it could be one of two things. So it could be that the anomaly is between 1 and -1, or it could be, in theory, I think that the sample size is 0.
Maybe you could do a black dot for a 0 sample size.
Yeah, you're right. That might be helpful to distinguish between the two. Yeah, that's a good idea. Something like that. Yeah. So like for sure, like out in here, right? I'm sure this is between +1 and -1. Of course, there's got to be tons of sample in this inner circle where I'm pointing. But yeah, I think out here where Dr. Decker was talking about, it's probably because sample size really drops off there. It's a good point. Good ideas for improvement. I'll make a note of that. What else?
What is a typical sample size that you have, just kind of an average? You put me on the spot. I have to check that. Let me check that. I actually did at one point develop a sample size chart. So it literally was collocated on this. The only difference was the color bar was sample size. So again, that also might be a nice addition to it. But I can't remember exactly, but I remember thinking that the sample sizes, as a function of this
grid that we created, at this kind of dot spacing seemed to be, it seemed to be representative of what I felt like was probably some sort of physical relationship or statistical relationship. But I have to go back and check that too.
Okay.
We do know that this data is, and I should have that here too, and I don't. The data is from about 1980 or 1981. I think the phase diagram looks at dates that are, I think, plus or minus, it's either, I want to say it's plus or minus 30 days. Actually, I think Dr. Decker, you may have set that up originally. It was something like plus.
Right. I
minus
can't remember
30
what
days.
I should. Yeah. That's, of course, it's an arbitrary price. It's
Right.
the trade-off between representativeness and sample size. And I can't remember what number I chose for the number of days, plus or minus. But that's change one line of code, and it can be anything else.
Right. Right. And we should say too, two of the things that I really like about this diagram, other than trying to just do something that's a little bit different, is because I think it better reflects, there's a lot of tables out there, right? Your 1 to 8 tables, and then it tells you the relationship, +2, -3. But what this gives you that those tables don't give you, at least explicitly, is it shows you how things vary as a function of amplitude, right? You can really see those kind of relationships. You can infer a lot, and it doesn't cut off, right? You can see when there's maybe signals that are stronger near the boundaries of phases, as opposed to just looking explicitly at phase 1 and 2. And some of the, I think, really good examples here, like between phase 1 and 2, it seems like that is when, again, I'm making a visual observation here, but visually speaking, it seems to me that the warmest signal is actually near the boundary of phase 1 and 2. And again, you don't necessarily get that information if you just look at tables that explicitly show, the discrete phases.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Would so this is showing for however many samples went into each dot. It's still an average though, so we're not seeing the whole magnitude of the anomaly.
Right, it's an average of the dots. It's an average
So
of the.
it might be worth doing
sample.
an absolute value, because really strong anomalies in either direction are important, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And then maybe considering breaking down from there where to, worrying about sign afterwards.
I think that could be interesting too, and where my mind goes with that, when I think about some of the clients I've worked with in the past, is, sometimes a trader or, again, end user might say, okay, Dave, I see that, you're expecting phase 5, 15 days from now. And if that happens, you'd expect kind of a coolish period, but I'm really sensitive to a +10 anomaly. Historically speaking, has that ever happened? What's the chance of that happening? If you did something like Lynn suggested, or an analysis similar to that, you would be able to look at that and say, you know what? Actually, there have been 2 events of the, 50 or 40 or whatever it is. So you would be able to provide a little bit more context of that historical risk for that event that goes completely in a different direction, which could be important. Yeah, it's a good point.
So like a conditional probability analysis or chart,
right?
Like they do with ensembles. What's the probability of each DD is exceeding some threshold given a particular dot here on the diagram, kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, if we got really fancy, right, we could, whatever, I forgot this, but like a mouse over type chart,
Yeah.
Python chart, and you just mouse over the dot, and actually, what do I have? College page up here, right? They've got some of this stuff. You guys know where I'm going. Yeah, like a mouse over, and it shows you kind of what Lynn was talking about. Yeah, that's a good idea. Okay. All right, cool. So we can move on, I guess. Just, you could email us if you have any other questions. And just a heads up to Philip's on the line. Philip and I were talking about, I guess this is one other housekeeping note. We don't have to get, if we have time at the end, we can get into it. But Philip and I were talking about maybe, I think most folks now have seen we've added the persistence inputs to the weekly forecast table. This is so that we can better evaluate it, QA it, things like that. But Philip and I were also talking about ideas of maybe creating some new hybrid or dynamic, call it what you will, persistence inputs. Like these persistent inputs, for example, are just based on historical information. There's observed. But maybe you build something that's a sort of a hybrid thing that's also that's a function of, say, the EC model or something like that. In other words, let's say today's EC guidance said it was going to be plus 10, plus 10, plus 10 for the next 15 days, like 1 to 5, 6 to 10, 11 to 15. Applying that, the forecast, and persisting that. So what Philip and I are going to throw out, kind of submit our ideas, and we might do this in a little bit of a forum or something. And then we're going to share that with the rest of the group offline, probably like during the course of the week, and just ask for ideas and feedback. And then, you know, hopefully at some point over the next few weeks, months, whatever, we might be able to investigate and do a little bit of research into that and maybe add those inputs to the forecast table. Any, yeah.
Just a comment or something that just came to my mind as you were saying that. That might be a really good idea to float by the teams that we have from MU this semester, to have them, you know, if we have a couple ideas of different forecasts that you want to put in there, to have them do that and build it and follow it and report on it, just as a, you know, part of their assignment.
I love that idea. And I think that's a great idea. And just give a little context for some of the other folks here. We've got a professor at the University of Missouri, Professor Lupo, who's asked if we could basically utilize the forecast contest UI within his subseasonal forecast contest class. So Lynn is helping to, you know, kind of organize that and stuff like that with the rest of our subseasonal contest team. And yeah, so that, I think there's about 15 students who are going to be participating, give or take. So yeah, I think that's a great idea. We'll have to talk more about that. Yeah. All right. All right. So anyway, all right. I think that's it for housekeeping. Just if I miss anything, just jump in.
Can I add one other thing?
Yeah, sure.
I know it probably seems obvious, but maybe it isn't to everybody. For any of the forecasts that are, you know, in there, even the moving averages and the persistence, just like a definition in there, or just so there's no, what do you mean exactly?
Yeah, that would be good. I agree. We have some of that.
Is that in the tools somewhere?
Yeah, we have some of those.
But maybe there should be a specific.
Maybe we should just like always include it in the
right
description field.
Right. No, I agree. That would be something that should be on our short list. Yeah, we have a little bit up here too. We talk a little bit, but not enough. I agree. I really like that idea too. Yeah, we should add it. And by the way, anyone can anytime you have an idea or anything like that, feel free to add it to our sandbox too. We still have that too. That's a good place to add ideas. Yep. We haven't updated in a little while, but still we have some stuff. All right. Let's see. All right, so let's go back to the most recent verification. All right, so that was, yeah, I know. We'll sort this one. This was a tough one. I was reading to, right, yeah, Paul Roundy. Good job, Professor Roundy there.
I think we all need to go Adirondack camping.
You're right. The Adirondack camping is the secret.
I know, that was like a perfect score. If only his spread was 0. But yeah, it was a tough one, and we started. I think we talked about this a little bit last week. Dave Darkangelo was on the line too, and we talked about how the forecast, I think, started to go awry for some of us anyway last week. Some of us did well, but I didn't. And then this week it continued in that direction. I mean, the verification, right, was 54 CDDs, and you can see that the 30-year was, it actually came in. I think it was only the second time in a long while, maybe the second time all summer, since we did started CDDs, that it was cooler than the 30-year. So the 30-year was 54.8, and the 10-year seen here is 58.7. So a lot of us were on the wrong side of the 30-year, and in a combination also because of the fact that the verification was very close to the 30-year, the scores were not so good. And I also definitely I want to point out, I looked at this a little bit beforehand, the ECMWF, really obviously a poor score. I think this is
so we're talking a little bit more about. So we've got Nat on, folks like that. This is, I think, the second or third week in the row where the EC forecasted near the warm edge. Here, I'll sort by the forecast. Yeah, so the EC was the hottest or warmest forecast of our entire distribution, right? Models, humans, statistical inputs, whatever. It was the warmest and did not do well. And I'll just scroll back quickly to last week and do the same thing. And so this is last week's forecast. And we can see again the EC was near the top here at 68.4, and the verification wasn't too great. And I think even 1 week before that, again, I just looked at this earlier, so that's why I kind of cheated. But yeah, here we have the EC was at 74.8. And the verification was, about 10 CDs lower. So, this has been I think you can call it a trend, right? 3 weeks in a row here, at least. I won't go back any further, but where the EC has been projecting extremely, or at least very warm forecasts. I say that sort of
So
qualitatively.
it's doing way worse than the CFS, just in the other direction.
Yeah, and it's yeah. I mean, it's a little bit concerning here, right? I remember too at the start of this, right? There was talk about, hey, the EC, going back about a month ago. I remember us having some conversations about how the fact that the EC had been doing, it seemed well, right? Like kind of getting into the middle of summer. Was talking about it, again, this is more not very scientifically, but kind of getting into a groove. It was doing well in terms of performance. And just at that time, right? And I think that was part of the reason too. A lot of us thought, well, okay, the EC's really hot here. The pattern's been hot, right? Like obviously first half of summer was extremely hot. We should ride this, right? The EC knows what it's talking about here. And not to say that the next few weeks, obviously we'll talk about that here shortly. Some of the forecasts are getting pretty warm again, but at least for this period of the last 2 or 3 weeks, the EC did not resolve well the variability, the cooler variability that occurred. And here, I'll just pull up the Dynacast here. And so we're looking at August 5th to August 9th. So I went 1 day ahead here earlier, so let me go back. I was just verifying that the persistence was looking okay. So here's the August 5th to August 9th verification. So, I've played this game a lot where if you're trying to defend your forecast and you are hotter, you might say, well, if it wasn't for that darn cool strip, from Detroit to Chicago down to almost Dallas, my forecast would have been perfect. The EC would have verified perfect, right? But, coulda, woulda, shoulda, right? That happened, that is part of the pattern. So,
Well, that's not, oh, okay. That's not that cool, right? It's
right. You're right. It was cool enough, I guess.
deceiving,
Yeah,
okay.
right. But and here's the 500 millibar pattern, and here and I'm going to slow down here in a second, but I'll pull up this one last map, and then we can really open it up. Here was the here was the forecast from Maxar on the top left, and then our EC and CFS spatial forecast. And what was the verification again? What did I say? Verification was 54, right? Paul Roundy nailed it. And let's go back to that. What did I do with that? Oh, sorry, here it is. Yeah, so 54. Maxar, it was a tough forecast for everyone. Maxar had 64, 65. But, and also let's just, this is not judgment. This is about learning. It was hard to pick out, right? I mean, obviously that big, 16, 20 days out, et cetera. But, obviously that we had that big cool strip that cut across this area. Arguably, they had a little bit of a cool strip here, but obviously it was a lot cooler. Let's just take a quick look at what they were talking about back on July 21st. Overall themes, same. Most areas forecast warm side of normal. Pattern is expected to have characteristics of positive VO, which is broad, but which is retained by a broad, but Western Hemispheric to Indian Ocean based MJO. Persistence of the MJO around 1 to 3.
The models offer different solutions, the EC being hotter in the south and west, but cooler in the north. CFS is cooler in general. Confidence is low. All right, let me just kind of open it up here. Do folks have any thoughts here in terms of, I guess, why? I guess a couple of things we talked about, like the EC. Any thoughts in terms of the EC and recent performance there, and just in general, why the maybe the forecast kind of in the past couple of weeks in general have verified a little bit cooler than expectations?
I mean, I'll throw my 2 cents.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I just I've been doing this for like a year now, and every time a verification like this happens, it just makes me more frustrated and confused as to how we're supposed to do this to the best of our ability. Because David mentioned that the EC had a stretch back in July of 4 or 5 weeks in a row where it was verifying strongly, and when I looked at that, I gave it a couple of weeks just to make sure that it wasn't a fluke, and so by the time I was ready to start using it in my forecast, it shifted, and now we've got 3 weeks in a row of poor verification scores. So I don't know. It doesn't seem it almost appears. I think we may have saw it last summer where once it latches on to a consistent warm pattern, it takes a while for it to move out of it. So it seems that we may be in a bit of a cool stretch right now, and the EC is still forecasting very on the warm side. I don't know.
I don't know what the precipitation forecasts were for on the EC, if it was hot and dry or hot and wet. But if it was hot and dry, I'm wondering if maybe there's too much of a positive feedback in the land surface. If the soils dry out in the model, then the model will amp up the sensible heat flux and get it warmer and drier and warmer and drier. You get that positive feedback in the summertime. And I'm wondering if that was happening in the model or if it was a wet and warm forecast over these last few weeks.
I remember, I think it was last week that Matt Lanza went over, I think it was Matt Lanza went over that. And he said the EC in the central part of the country I think he did say it had a warm, dry bias, and that it was causing some issues, which I think actually is the main problem with it right now, because if it's too warm in the area where the center of the cool in the country is, that would kind of cause, at least I think, kind of a big error.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was kind of wondering about that because, I mean, the area was cool is also an area where analyzed soil moisture anomalies, at least when I checked, were positive, and so that was my thought, is that to the west of there, you see negative soil moisture anomalies, but right near the center of the country, it looked like it's positive. So perhaps that's a factor.
I was thinking this probably speaks to the model formulations. This EC model is, I think we need to let go of the expectation that it's going to perform well, because actually, the CFS is more reliable in a way because it's always cold, and you always know where to go from that forecast. But the EC is not, and the differences between the two models. This EC model is initialized twice a week, I believe.
Right.
And while it has many advantages over the CFS, obviously, that is still initialized 4 times a day, I think, even though it's a kind of read forecast. So, maybe there's just things that it's missing coming from that, but I think a more in-depth look at, what the advantages and disadvantages of both model formulations might shed some light on this too.
Is this sort of like an accuracy versus precision issue where the EC, you can see the bias there is close to 0, but it's wildly swinging too hot, too warm from one forecast to the next, lately too hot. Whereas the CFS, it's reliably, 10 degrees, 10 CDDs too cold, but if every week it's 10, so you can account for that bias, you can correct for that bias.
Right.
It has that precision. It's just not accurate. So it sounds like you're saying if you did correct for the biases, the bias corrected CFS would do better than the bias corrected EC, since there isn't much bias there to correct for the EC.
Exactly. Exactly.
Question is the CFS a useful idiot, right? Is that the weather
Oh.
term for? No, I think, and by the way, I second what Michael said. I think Matt Lanza had a nice chart about that last week. Something about the fact that the EC had I think there might have been a precip bias and a temperature bias, like underestimating precip, overestimating temperatures out across like the Mississippi Valley area. So that would definitely be. I mean, and it gets into, I know, so like different research Lynn and Nat have done. It would be interesting to look at that, like conditional bias of the EC. Is there a problem there when it's been in a hot pattern that it has trouble with pattern transitions? It would be really interesting to look at that and to know that over 5 or 6 summers to see if that's a recurring theme. Because your memory always, it's easy for your memory to deceive you. Now that this just happened, I want to be like, oh yeah, I think this happens all the time, but I'm not. I don't know. I don't trust my memory, I guess. So I'd really like to look into that. That's a good topic. And that's just one for a lot of our participants to keep in mind, right? Because thanks to Maxar, we have a good amount of this data. So with a little bit of work, we might be able to actually investigate that. So anything else jump to mind in terms of, I don't know, any lessons learned? Any other things that, as we now shift gears into our forecast, anything else that we should be thinking about from the past few weeks?
There's one thing I noticed. It has to do more with the teleconnections. The NAO is back to its usual tricks that it was in the winter, where it seems to always verify on like the higher end of its forecast at range. And from what I can tell, the EPO forecast has, at 14 days, has provided almost no skill, if I'm reading it correctly, because the 14-day forecast and then comparing to the analysis, I don't see anything on there that I could use to make a forecast other than throwing a dart at a dartboard.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna see if I can work something out for that in the future. But little spoiler for I've stopped using the EPO in my formulas temporarily, so I can figure out what to do with it.
Looks like between 10 and 14 days, you really lose the predictability there.
Yeah, like that.
At least over the last 6 months.
And that speaks more broadly to the Pacific pattern, right? The EPO. So if we're not able to project well the North Pacific pattern, yeah, that doesn't bode well, I'm sure, for national forecasts, U.S. forecasts. It's interesting, and that what's going on there too. Maybe again some tropical forcing, MJO things. Maybe just things outside of that. That's a good point though, Michael. Not an easy answer, but a good observation, I think. All right, let's. So we got 20 minutes, so I guess we should switch gears and actually talk about the forecast instead of bitching about the past forecast. All right, so today is August 11th, right? All right, so again, just a reminder as we get into this, especially for our participants here, student forecasters and whatnot. Let's try to go through the motions here. If possible, share your screen. Don't hesitate to show your video too. That's always helpful. And let's try to do it one-on-one. Try to make it formal. Like you can use any of us, Lynn, Nat, Dr. Decker, whoever, just someone else. And as if you're communicating or you're briefing that person. And then for the person being briefed, like Nat or Lynn or whoever else, let's try to really dig in and ask hard questions for your briefer, as if you were using this information to make decisions. All right, so with that, who would like to kick us off?
I guess I can.
Okay, you want to share your screen there?
Sure.
This Michael. And Michael, who do you want to brief here? You want to brief, how about you brief Lynn?
Okay. This should work. All right, let me make sure I'm right. I'm always on the wrong week. All right, so hey Lynn, forecast this week is for 52 CDDs with an average confidence spread of 8.4 CDDs. So started off this week with a value of 51.26 based on my EC Euro blend. Then took a look at the teleconnections. NAO took as a positive signal, which is actually a cool signal for the south. Based on the, if I have it here, I don't have it here, but I'll pull it up later if anyone wants to see it. It's a cool signal for the south and in the summer for the positive NAO. AO continues to be neutral, not a very strong signal. PNA forecast to be only slightly positive, but as you can see, the verification has been on the very high end and even outside the range recently. So took that as another positive signal, so a slightly warm signal, kind of overriding each other. So I only increased my CDD value by 0.4. 0.4. As I mentioned earlier, I had to discontinue my usage of the EPO, at least for the time being, until I can figure out what to do with this, because missing a signal, especially one that's that strong, at least this looks strong, with this being the forecast and that being the verification, this is not giving me any kind of useful information at this time. So I have to discontinue this until I can figure out what to do with it. And last but not least, the CPC forecast, showing a lot of warmth, but I'm cautious with this, only increasing my forecast by 0.3 CDDs again, because there's been a lot of coolness in the north central and midwestern areas these past few weeks, and if it does continue, and I think it might. The CPC usually isn't very good at seeing that, and so that's why it's only 0.3, despite there being a lot of areas being above 60% warmth, especially the East Coast, and even Chicago having more than a 50, well, slightly around 50% chance of being above average, but pretty close to the equal chance line. But even so, it not being below normal is still a good thing for warmer forecasts. So that being said, final value was 51.96, rounded to 52 CDDs. Any complaints, comments, questions, concerns?
Well, thank you. That was I like how you started out with your number and guided me through how it went up and down. Sorry, and how you arrived at your final number. So, what for you, given all that rationale, how do you estimate a value from those? For example, you say a little positive or a little negative, and then
so
you have a systematic way to do that, or is it just?
It's more of so how I started off is I'll take a look and see, like, okay, the NAO is a positive signal, and then I know that the NAO positive in summer means the south is cooler, at least the southeast anyway. And based off of that, I'll come up with a value. I don't have like a set system where it's I guess it's kind of a I don't know what the word is. I just kind of, it's the wrong word, but guess a value. It's not guess, but like, if you know what I mean. Can't think of the right word for whatever reason, but so I look at the signal, so positive NAO, and then come up with a value based on what that signal looks like, but I don't have a set system where positive 2 NaO equates to 0.5 CDDs or whatever.
Okay. And then going to the EPO. So the fork, okay. All right. Yeah, I see what you mean. As that being that forecast looks like nothing, especially compared to the magnitudes. Is there a reason why you would include the EPO at this time of year? In terms of, you look at leading modes and, you know.
I think it's, I think it helps to look at more things usually, especially from a teleconnection standpoint. Granted, if there's no skill here, unfortunately, so it doesn't help my forecast. But you know, if this had been forecast, it would have been would have given me a little bit more of a clear signal that they're, you know, I think blocking in the Pacific, especially in the winter, it's a little bit more important, but in the summer as well, I think the Pacific is a good indicator of what might be going on. At least it sets up the pattern for the rest of the country. So I just think it's better to have more information than less, even if that information is I won't be kind here. I'll call it useless information because that's honestly what it is.
Well,
but
yeah, yeah, it is. But I think you sort of made a correct decision to not include this. I think that's totally correct.
Yeah.
But there's also probably, I would recommend maybe going back to the literature on teleconnections, because it's so active now. And I think there's a lot of pieces of information you could just pull from studies that say, don't bother using that this time of year. It's, you know, somebody's done something to look at it to say, no matter what's going on, whether you had forecasts of it or not, it didn't really matter to what you were trying to predict. So, you know, I do like that idea, you know, more information is better, but you can probably, more informed information is even better. And I think there's a wealth of stuff in the literature to search through now.
Yeah, I'll look into that.
But that was great. I like how you approached that, and it was very clear.
All right, cool.
Open it up.
Sounds good. We'll just keep it moving here. Zach, I don't think you had a chance to go last time, right?
No, I didn't.
All right. Would you like to go next? And maybe we could pair you off with Nat Johnson on the receiving end.
Sure.
And then Philip, how about you can plan to go next after that?
Sure.
Maybe we'll pair Philip with Dr. Decker, the old tag team, right?
All right, hi Nat. My forecast for today for August 26th to August 30th was for 49.9 CDDs with a normal average confidence spread of 8.4. My formula this week, bit of a mishmash compared to my previous formulas. I weighted 50% on the 10-year, 20% on the MGO analog, 20% on the EC, and 10% on the trend. I'll start off, giving my reasoning as to why I used each one of those. As we've seen last summer when I first started the forecast contest, and this summer as well, the 10-year is a very reliable metric during the summer. Instead of just weighting it entirely, I've been trying to find some way to improve on it. So it makes up a majority of my weighting scheme, but I'm trying to find other metrics to build around the 10-year. And then I weighted 20% on the MGO analog. The reasons for that: one, can see on the teleconnections site that the forecasts for the MJO are very active. I know this is I think this is the GFS ensemble forecast for the MGO, projects it out into potentially looks like maybe phases 1 or 8. The CPC also mentioned how active the MJO would be, and the MJO analog forecast that we have on this metric or on this table has been very strong and from a directional correctness standpoint, so weighting that as well. We mentioned a bunch of times earlier that the EC has had 3 tough verifications in a row after 5 or 6 strong ones. So it might seem questionable why I would weight it here, but I noticed that the teleconnections in general are starting to shift back to where they were in July when the EC was performing strongly. You can see that the NAO is starting to shift potentially back towards the negative phase. The AO is staying neutral, if not slightly negative, and the PNA is positive. So the very warm EC forecast, I think, potentially has some merit. And then finally, I weighted 10% on the trend just because the trend forecast metric has been doing well, and trying to account for the potential cold trend that we've been seeing the last 3 weeks. Any questions? Comments?
Yeah, very, very nice. So, I'm just curious about, the MJO contribution, because that forecast you showed is a really quite strong projection. How does that match up with the tool that Dave showed earlier?
Well, it's a little bit tough, as we mentioned earlier, because Dave's charts are only out for the 1 to 5 day lags. But if we keep this at August 10th, the 1 to 8 phase space seems to be a warm signal. But that's only for a lag 1 to 5. I'm not entirely sure what it is, 16 to 20 days out.
But the forecast looked at least pretty confident for the next. Do you show the MJO forecast or the MJO phase diagram again? Yeah. So yeah, it's pretty confident, at least according to this, that it will get to a strong 8, or borderline 8.1. So yeah, interesting. So yeah, so that would seem to potentially have a positive HDD, CDD signal. So okay. But your forecast seems to be on the cooler side of the range of forecasts. But yeah, but I think you explained your reasoning well. So, I noticed. So you're looking at the CPC discussion. They talk about I think greater than average uncertainty in terms of the flow field. So so what influences your confidence in this forecast?
Well, it's a combination of what the teleconnections show. As I mentioned, it appears that they're projected to shift back to where they were in back in July, when the verifications were coming in quite warm. So I would, based on just that, I would probably start to be a little bit more confident in my forecast. But because I'm relying, putting 20% weight on the EC, and the EC has been up and down, that kind of balances out, because I would have lower confidence if I was weighting more on the EC, because the teleconnections and even the CPC are showing warm. That kind of balances out to give me just average confidence.
Okay, well, thank you.
Hey, let's see, how much time do we have left? 5 minutes. Zach, can you pull up that our new MGO charts again, real quick, please? Yeah, and I was thinking about where Nat was going with that, and you know, the idea that if you assuming a perfect forecast, like you knew 100% it was going to be, I don't know, out where whatever the GFS showed, then you might say, oh, then I have really strong confidence it's going to be warm. But there's a little bit of a wrinkle there, right? Like even if you assume it's just about 100% right in terms of it's going to be getting out here, it's not quite in that sweet spot, right? Like between phases 1 and 2, right? The GFS ensemble showed it kind of hooking a little bit back toward into phase 8, and you could see how phase 8 at least is a little bit more variability. There's a little more uncertainty. However you want to, it gets a little bit weaker as you get toward phase 7. So arguably there's even if the forecast is pretty darn good and it gets out to phase 8, if it hooks a little bit more to the right, not necessarily as much of a warm signal as if it hooks a little bit more to the left. I don't know how you handle that. You can handle that in your sigma. You can handle that in just it is what it is kind of thing. But it makes it a little bit more. You could argue it makes it a little bit more complicated, I think.
Yeah.
So. I guess on average, the MJO typically goes counterclockwise. So would we say maybe there's a greater chance of it hooking to the left as opposed to the right based on climatology?
That's an interesting point. Although I was also thinking, if you want to just pull that up real quick, and I promise, Philip, the forecast. I wonder if you could also argue that it might be underestimating the amount of progression into 6 and 7, though, in order to get there. It's kind of showing that beeline. Right. But at the end, I agree that I don't know. So definitely a couple different wrinkles there to think about. We'll see how this verifies. But let's see, Phil. We'll give you a couple minutes here. Over to you. And this is great, Philip. You're going to have Dr. Decker only has 2 minutes, and then he's got to run to this next meeting. So over to you.
All right. So let me pull this up. All right. So I found out that I actually have the coldest forecast of all the all the human inputs. My value is 48.9 CVDs with a spread near normal around 8.2, and my weighting scheme is here on the right. And to do that, I first look at my tropical signal, which I note is very active over India and Southeast Asia, which is a little different from the MJO signal that's put in phase 5. And I mentioned that the models say that the signal will likely propagate through the null phase back into phase 1 of reopening. And we will have the, let me pull this up. So using a lag composites that I like to use for phase 1, we see that it is a slightly warm signal for the CONUS, which generally agrees with the idea of warmer than normal chances based on the tropical signal. And I also note that the La Nina is also, oops, let me fix that, sorry. And then La Nina is also a warm signal during this time of year. And you can see from the anomalies, the composites suggest that La Nina is more likely warm. Now, as we already mentioned before, the CPC, all right, having some trouble with these tabs, sorry. My bad, okay. So the CPC forecast suggests that it's gonna be warm in the desert Southwest into the Great Basin region and also in the Northeast with equal chance occurring in the lower Mississippi River Basin. So I treated that as a warm signal. I believe my value is 48.99, similar sigma above average. AO, NAO, EPO, as was mentioned, are all highly uncertain, and I use a slightly different, not just the GFS, but also the EC and Canadian. And if you look at the AO, NAO, EPO, it's a complete mess. The only one that sort of looks like it has a signal is the PNA, which seems to be slightly positive. So I treated the teleconnections as basically climatology, and I also for this forecast only, I changed the weighting to basically nothing. EC shows a ridge dominating northeast, and the CFS is similar, but with a slightly stronger trough and weaker ridge. And we have a warm EC again, 57.7, and the CFS is warm mainly in the desert southwest. So putting everything together, I would say my confidence was around average, with higher confidence from the tropical signal and from climatology, and a decreased confidence from the teleconnections and also from the EC being less reliable recently. And that gets me to a near normal spread and 48.9.
All right. I mean, I was going to ask you how you came up with that 8.2, but then you just answered my question right there at the end. So why go 2% for the teleconnections rather than just 0?
This was mostly because of how uncertain it was. I decided to put it in as a basically add in an extra 30-year normal value, sort of to show that to sort of move my forecast away from being as warm, given the lower confidence of it going that warm.
Okay. All right. Very good.
All right, I guess that probably wraps us up. It's 11:30. So yeah, thanks for everyone for joining. And if we haven't scared them off, I think Nat Johnson's going to join us again next Friday. Is that right? At 9:30?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. All right. That's perfect. So that'll be great. We can see how things have progressed then and have more conversations about model diagnostics, errors, and things like that. So, well, thanks everyone, and have a good rest of your week.
Thanks, you too.
Thank you. You too.
Bye, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.